Captain Jake Morgan stood on the bridge of the Defender and stared at the stars beyond the viewscreen. 5 years had passed since the war with the Elf Empire began, and every day felt heavier than the last. His uniform carried the weight of too many losses and too many friends who would never come home. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency around him as his crew worked their stations with practiced precision. Lieutenant Amy Chen looked up from her scanner console and her expression troubled. "Captain, we are receiving a distress signal from Sector 9 in the asteroid field. It is weak but definitely there, and someone is in serious trouble." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The asteroid field in Sector 9 was dangerous territory, and ships rarely ventured there without good reason. "What is the origin of the signal?" he asked, already suspecting the answer would complicate his evening. Amy hesitated, and her fingers dancing across the holographic display. "Elf signature, sir. The ship appears to be a small scout vessel, and based on the energy readings, it is badly damaged. I am detecting minimal power and life support is failing." The word elf hit Jake like a physical blow. Memories flooded back unbidden and unwanted. His brother David laughing at the dinner table before, shipping out to Kepler 7, his mother humming while she cooked in their small apartment on Earth, his father teaching him to throw a baseball in the park near their home, all of them gone now and taken by elf aggression and elf weapons and elf cruelty. The colony on Kepler 7 had been peaceful and home to 3,000 human families trying to build a new life. The elves claimed the planet sat too close to their territory and demanded the humans leave. When the colonists refused, the elf warships came. David died in the first wave of attacks, and his body never recovered from the burning ruins. Jake's parents had tried to evacuate on a civilian transport, but the ship was captured by elf raiders. No one ever heard from them again. Sir Amy's voice cut through his dark thoughts. "What are your orders?" "The distress signal is getting weaker." Jake turned away from the view screen and his hands clasped behind his back. Regulations were clear on this matter. All distress calls must be investigated regardless of origin. It was one of the oldest laws of space travel, and born from the understanding that the void showed no mercy to anyone, but every fiber of his being screamed to ignore this call and to let the elves face the consequences of their own actions. "Prepare the ship for approach," he finally said, and his voice cold. "But keep weapons hot and shields at maximum. If this is some kind of trap, I want us ready to fight our way out," Captain Amy replied, and relief evident in her tone. "Setting course now." The Defender moved through space with elegant purpose, and its engines humming as it navigated toward the asteroid field. Jake watched the view screen as massive rocks began to appear, and some as large as moons drifting in ancient patterns. The distress signal led them deeper into the maze where shadows grew longer and navigation became treacherous. There, Sir Amy pointed at a section of the view screen where her console had highlighted a shape. The elf scout vessel wedged between two asteroids, and it looks like something went very wrong. Jake leaned forward, studying the image. The ship was small and elegant in the way elf designs always were, with flowing curves and silver hull plating. But now it was broken and cracked open like an egg, with atmosphere venting into space in frozen streams. Scorch marks covered the hull, suggesting weapons fire or perhaps an explosion. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. "Life signs?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "One reading, sir, and very weak," Amy reported. "There is something else, Captain, and the scanners are picking up 2 additional heat signatures near the pilot, but they are not registering as elf biology." Jake frowned. "What are they then?" "Unknown, sir. But the thermal readings suggest reptilian life forms, and they are quite large based on heat output but confined to a small space, and it is very strange." Dragons, Jake thought, and the word tasting bitter in his mouth. Of course the elf would have dragons. The creatures were legendary among both humans and elves and bonded to their masters from hatching in rituals that went back thousands of years. He had seen dragons in battle and watched them tear through human fighters with terrible efficiency. He had also seen what happened when a dragon's bonded partner died, and the creature simply stopped and fell from the sky as if its own life had been cut short. "Prepare a boarding team," Jake ordered, standing from his command chair. "Full combat gear and medical supplies. I will lead the team myself." Sir Amy turned in her seat, and concern written across her face. "If it is a trap, you should not be the one going over there. Let me send Lieutenant Baker and his Marines." Jake shook his head. "No, this is my decision and my responsibility. If something goes wrong, I will handle it." You have the bridge, Chen, and if we are not back in 30 minutes, get the ship out of here and report to command. Amy nodded reluctantly. Aye, sir, and be careful, please. 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the airlock with 2 Marines at his back. Corporal Linda Hayes checked her rifle while Private Tom Fisher adjusted the medical kit strapped to his armor. Both were veterans who had served with Jake for 3 years, and he trusted them with his life. The airlock connected to the damaged elf ship with a metallic clang, and the seal hissed as it pressurized. Jake drew his sidearm and nodded to Hayes, who activated the door controls. The portal slid open, revealing darkness beyond, and the acrid smell of smoke and burned circuits wafted through. Stay sharp, Jake ordered and moved forward into the alien vessel. Emergency lighting flickered, casting everything in shades of red and shadow. The corridor was narrow and elegant even in its damaged state, with walls that curved organically rather than meeting at hard angles. Sparks fell from exposed conduits, and somewhere deeper in the ship, metal groaned under stress. They found the cockpit after navigating through 2 collapsed passages. The door had been blown inward by some explosive force and hung at an angle from twisted hinges. Jake pushed through and stopped at what he saw inside. The elf woman was slumped over the control console, and her silver hair matted with blue blood that leaked from a wound on her temple. Her armor was cracked in several places, revealing pale skin beneath. She was small, like all elves, with delicate features and pointed ears. But there was nothing delicate about the determination written on her unconscious face. Curled around her on the console were 2 dragons. One was gold with scales that shimmered even in the dim light. The other was deep blue like the ocean on Earth. Both were small and no larger than house cats, and their breathing shallow and labored. Their scales looked dull and lifeless, and Jake realized they were dying along with their bonded master. Sir Hayes whispered, "And what do we do?" Jake stared at the scene before him, and every reason to hate staring back. This was the enemy and the same species that had killed his family and destroyed his life. He should leave her here and let fate take its course. No one would question that decision, and no one would blame him. But then the small blue dragon opened its eyes and looked directly at Jake. In that ancient reptilian gaze, he saw something that struck him to his core, and not hatred or aggression, but a desperate pleading cry for help that transcended species and language and war. Jake Morgan found himself unable to move as the small blue dragon held his gaze. Behind him, Corporal Hayes and Private Fisher waited for orders, but he could not speak. Something about that look in the creature's eyes cut through years of anger and grief and touched a part of him he thought had died with his family. The elf woman stirred slightly, and her violet eyes fluttering open. For a moment she seemed confused about where she was, then her gaze focused on Jake and his uniform, and the human features of his face. Recognition dawned in her expression, followed by something like resignation. "So you came," she whispered in accented English, and her voice barely audible over the creaking of the damaged ship. "I suppose this is where it ends. Will you leave me here, or perhaps finish what the pirates started? Either way, I thank you for coming, and at least I will not die completely alone." Jake felt his hand moving toward his sidearm out of instinct and years of trained response to elf presence. But then he noticed how the woman's hand rested protectively on the gold dragon, even as she faced what she believed was her death. The small creature nuzzled against her palm, seeking comfort, and the blue dragon made a soft sound that reminded Jake of a kitten, crying. "Who attacked you?" he heard himself ask, and the question surprising everyone, including himself. The elf woman blinked in surprise. "You want to know?" she asked, and confusion replacing resignation. "Why would a human care about my fate?" "Just answer the question," Jake said more harshly than he intended. "Pirates," she replied, and her breathing labored. "Not elf and not human, and something else entirely. They came from nowhere, and their weapons tore through my shields before I could react. I tried to escape, but they pursued me into the asteroid field. I thought I could lose them in the rocks, but my ship took too much damage." She paused and coughed, and blue blood flecked her lips. "They left when they saw I had nothing worth taking, and nothing but dragons, and apparently even pirates have some honor." The gold dragon lifted its head and looked at Jake with the same pleading expression as its blue companion. These creatures were young, he realized, and probably only months old, and bonded to this woman for such a short time. If she died here, they would die too, and not from wounds, but from the breaking of a bond that connected their very souls. "Fisher," Jake said without taking his eyes off the elf woman, "get the medical kit ready. We are taking her back to the Defender." Sir Hayes stepped forward and shock evident in her voice. Sir, she is an elf and regulations state. I know what regulations state, Corporal Jake interrupted. I also know that regulations require us to respond to all distress calls regardless of origin. This woman is injured and dying, and we have the ability to help. That is all that matters right now. But sir, the crew in command and they will ask questions, Hayes protested. Then I will answer those questions, Jake said firmly. Now help me get her stabilized for transport. We do not have much time. Fisher moved forward with the medical kit and his hands working quickly to assess the elf woman's injuries. She has a serious head wound and multiple fractures and internal bleeding, he reported. I can stabilize her for transport, but she needs a proper medical bay soon or she will not make it. The elf woman watched them work with wide eyes and disbelief written across her delicate features. Why are you doing this? She asked again, and her voice growing weaker. Your people hate mine, and I have heard the stories of what we did to your colonies. You have every reason to let me die here. Jake knelt beside her and careful not to disturb the dragons. Maybe I do have reasons, he said quietly. Maybe I lost people I loved to your kind, and maybe I've spent 5 years hating every elf I encountered. But right now, looking at you and these creatures who trust me despite everything, I am realizing that hate has not brought anyone back. It has not made anything better, and it has only made me more empty inside. The woman's violet eyes searched his face. What is your name? She whispered. Captain Jake Morgan of the human frigate Defender, he replied.
And you are Lynn, she said with a weak smile.
Just Lynn, and no titles or ranks matter much when you are dying in a broken ship. These are my companions, and she gestured to the dragons. Spark is the gold one, and River is blue, and they are barely 6 months old, and I have failed them completely. Spark made a small chirping sound and climbed from Lynn's shoulder onto Jake's arm. The dragon's claws were sharp but gentle as they gripped his uniform sleeve. It looked up at him with golden eyes that seemed far too ancient for such a young creature. River followed and moving to Jake's other shoulder, and both dragons settled there as if they had known him their entire lives. They trust you, Lynn said, and wonder in her voice. Dragons never trust strangers, and especially not humans, but they know somehow that you mean no harm. Perhaps there is more to you than just a soldier, Captain Morgan. Fisher finished applying emergency bandages and setting up a portable oxygen system for Lynn. She is as stable as I can make her here, sir, he reported. But we need to move now. Jake carefully lifted Lynn in his arms and surprised by how light she felt. The dragons remained on his shoulders and their warm weight somehow comforting. Hayes led the way back through the damaged corridors while Fisher covered their rear. The elf ship groaned around them and metal shrieking as the structure continued to fail. They reached the airlock and crossed back to the Defender without incident. Amy was waiting with a medical team and her eyes widening when she saw what Jake carried. The medics rushed forward with a stretcher, but the dragons refused to leave Jake's shoulders and hissing when anyone else approached. It is all right, Jake told them gently. These people will help Lynn and you need to let them work. I promise she will be safe. Spark and River looked at each other, then back at Jake. Slowly they climbed down and settled on the stretcher beside Lynn. The medical team rushed away toward the medical bay, and Jake watched them go, feeling strangely empty without the weight of the dragons. Sir Amy said carefully, and what exactly just happened over there? Jake turned to face his second in command and suddenly aware that the entire bridge crew was staring at him. I made a choice, he said simply. We found an injured person and we helped them, and that is all there is to it. But she is an elf. Amy protested. The crew is not going to understand this, and command is definitely not going to understand when they find out. Jake moved to his command chair and sat down heavily. Then I will explain it to them, he said. But right now I need you to set course for the nearest human outpost. That woman needs medical care beyond what we can provide here, and the sooner we get her to proper facilities, the better her chances. Amy hesitated, then nodded. Aye, Captain, and setting course for Station 7. ETA 4 hours at maximum speed. Good, Jake said and leaned back in his chair. The exhaustion he had been fighting for hours suddenly crashed over him like a wave. Inform the station that we are bringing in a medical emergency, and they can prepare whatever questions they want. I will deal with them when we arrive. As the Defender turned toward Station 7, Jake found himself thinking about the look in Lynn's eyes when she realized he was going to help her. It was the look of someone who had given up hope, suddenly finding it again. He wondered if he wore that same expression now, and if perhaps in saving her he had saved something in himself as well. Jake sat with Lynn for another hour, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with war. She told him about growing up in the elf homeworld, and how she had bonded with Spark and River when they hatched from eggs given to her by her grandmother. He told her about Earth and about throwing baseball with his father and his mother's cooking, and the dreams he had before everything fell apart. Spark eventually climbed into Jake's lap and curled up like a cat seeking warmth. The gold dragon purred softly in a sound that vibrated through Jake's chest in a strangely comforting way. River remained with Lynn but watched Jake with what seemed like approval. "You have a gift with them," Lynn said with a smile. "Dragons are not usually comfortable with strangers, but Spark acts as if he has known you forever. River is more cautious, but even she trusts you, and that is remarkable." "I do not know anything about dragons," Jake admitted as he gently stroked Spark's scales. "They are warm, and their scales feel like smooth metal, but somehow alive." "They are bonded to me," Lynn explained, "but dragons can form secondary bonds with those they deem worthy. It is rare and requires the dragon to sense something pure in a person's spirit. Spark is trying to form such a bond with you, Captain Morgan, and if you accept it, you will always have a connection to him, and he will know when you are in danger, and you will sense his emotions in return." Jake looked down at the small creature in his lap. "Is that what I am feeling now?" he asked. "This warmth spreading through my chest and this sense of contentment that is not my own?" "Yes," Lynn said. "Spark is sharing his feelings with you, and he is happy and he feels safe. That is his gift to you for saving his life and mine." Before Jake could respond, Commander Grant entered the room. "Captain Morgan," he said formally, "the inquiry board has reached a decision, and you are required to appear before them immediately." Jake gently lifted Spark and placed him back on the bed with Lynn. "I have to go," he told her. "Whatever happens, thank you for talking with me, and it helped more than you know." Lynn caught his hand before he could leave. "Wait," she said. "I want to give you something." She reached into a small bag beside her bed and pulled out a silver pendant shaped like a dragon in flight. "This belonged to my grandmother, and she gave it to me when I first bonded with dragons. It is a symbol of honor among my people, and worn only by those who have proven themselves worthy of a dragon's trust. I want you to have it." "I cannot accept this," Jake protested. "It is too valuable and too important to your family." "You saved my life," Lynn insisted and pressed the pendant into his palm. "You showed mercy when you had every reason not to, and you have proven yourself worthy 100 times over. Please take it and wear it as a reminder that not all elves are your enemy, and that perhaps there is hope for peace between our peoples someday." Jake closed his fingers around the pendant and felt the weight of it. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I will treasure this." The inquiry room felt even more oppressive the second time Jake entered. The 5 officers sat in judgment and their expressions unreadable. Admiral Ross stood and gestured for Jake to approach the table. "Captain Jake Morgan." Admiral Ross began. "This board has reviewed your actions in rescuing the elf pilot known as Lynn, and we have considered the circumstances and regulations involved and your service record. This was not an easy decision." Jake stood at attention and waited for the judgment he knew was coming. "Your actions violated several protocols regarding contact with enemy combatants," Admiral Ross continued. "You brought a potential security risk aboard your vessel, and you transported her to a human station without authorization. These are serious breaches that could normally result in court-martial and removal from command." Jake felt his stomach tighten but kept his expression neutral. "However," Admiral Ross said, and a hint of something else entering his voice, "your actions were also in accordance with the oldest traditions of space travel. You responded to a distress call as required by law, and you rendered aid to an injured person. The elf you rescued has provided valuable intelligence about pirate activity in that sector, and she has offered to serve as a liaison to open communication channels between our peoples. This is an unexpected opportunity that could lead to peace negotiations." The Admiral paused and looked at Jake directly. "This board finds that your actions, while irregular, were ultimately justified. You are hereby officially reprimanded for breach of protocol, but you will retain your command of the Defender, and no further disciplinary action will be taken. However, we are assigning you a new mission." "New mission," Sir Jake asked. "Lynn has requested that she be allowed to return to elf space to deliver a message to her government about what happened," Admiral Ross explained. "She believes her story of being rescued by a human captain could help advance peace talks. We have agreed to this request, but only if you and your crew escort her safely to the border. This will be a dangerous mission, and you will be traveling through contested space where both human and elf forces operate. Are you willing to accept this assignment? Jake thought about Lynn and about Spark curling up in his lap and about the pendant now hanging around his neck beneath his uniform. He thought about his brother and his parents and everything the war had taken from him. Then he thought about the possibility that maybe their deaths could lead to something better than just more death. I accept, Sir Jake said firmly. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn, Admiral Ross replied. Use the time to prepare your crew. And this will not be easy, Captain, and there will be those on both sides who do not want peace and who will try to stop you. Stay alert and trust your instincts. Jake saluted and left the inquiry room. As he walked back toward the medical wing, he found Amy waiting for him in the corridor. The crew heard about your new mission, she said. There is some concern, but mostly they trust you, Captain. Whatever you need, we are with you. Thank you, Amy, Jake said. That means more than you know. And I need you to prepare the ship for departure at first light. Full combat readiness, but we are not looking for a fight. Our job is to get Lynn home safely. Understood, Sir, Amy replied. One question, though, and what about the dragons? Are they coming with us? They go where Lynn goes, Jake said. And honestly, I think having them along might help, and they are a symbol of the bond we are trying to build. Plus, Spark has already claimed half my quarters as his nesting spot, apparently. Amy laughed. A captain with a pet dragon, she said. Command is never going to believe the reports from this mission. Jake smiled despite himself. Let them think what they want. We have a job to do, and that is all that matters. That evening, Jake returned to visit Lynn one more time before they departed. She was sitting up in bed looking much stronger. Spark and River were playing a game of chase around the room and their scales gleaming under the medical bay lights. I heard about your mission, Lynn said as he entered. Thank you, Captain Morgan, and I know this is asking a lot of you and your crew. Just Jake, he said. If we are going to be traveling together for the next few weeks, you can call me Jake. Lynn smiled. Then you must call me Lynn, she replied. No ranks and no titles and just two people trying to make a difference. She paused in her expression, growing serious. Jake, I want you to know that what you did has already changed things. Word of your mercy has spread among my people, and there are those who are willing to listen now and who believe that maybe peace is possible. You started something important. Jake touched the pendant beneath his uniform. Then let us finish it, he said, together. The Defender left Station 7 at dawn with Lynn aboard as their passenger, and her two dragons exploring every corner of the ship with curious enthusiasm. The crew had mixed reactions to their unusual guests, but Jake had made it clear that Lynn was under his protection, and anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with him directly. So far, no one had. Jake stood on the bridge watching the stars stream past as they traveled toward the border between human and elf space. The journey would take 5 days through some of the most dangerous territory in the sector. Pirates operated freely in this region, and both human and elf military forces patrolled, with itchy trigger fingers. Lynn joined him on the bridge wearing borrowed human clothing since her elf armor was still being repaired. She looked strange in the simple gray jumpsuit, but somehow she made it work. Spark rode on her shoulder while River had claimed a spot near the navigation console where Amy worked. Your crew is very professional, Lynn observed. I expected more hostility, but they have been nothing but courteous. They are good people, Jake replied. They trust my judgment even when they do not fully understand my decisions, and that is all I can ask. Amy looked up from her console. Captain, we are approaching the border region and I am picking up multiple contacts on long-range sensors. It looks like a battle is in progress ahead. Jake leaned forward. Can you identify the combatants? 2 human destroyers and 1 elf cruiser, Amy reported. They appear to be engaged in active combat and weapons fire and evasive maneuvers and the whole situation. Order, sir. Jake looked at Lynn. Can you contact the elf ship and explain what we are doing here? I can try, Lynn said, and moved to the communication station. She activated the channel and began speaking in the flowing musical language of her people. The response came back harsh and angry. They do not believe me, Lynn said after a moment. The captain thinks this is a trick and that I am a prisoner being used as bait. He is demanding that we surrender or he will open fire on us. Jake felt frustration building. Tell him that we are on a diplomatic mission and that we have authorization from both human and elf commands to proceed. Lynn tried again, but the response was equally hostile. He will not listen, she said. He has lost too many friends to humans and he thinks rescuing me is just propaganda. Jake, we need to turn back before this escalates. Before Jake could respond, the elf cruiser fired a warning shot that blazed past the Defender's bow. The bridge shook from the proximity of the blast and alarms began wailing. "Return fire," Corporal Hayes called from the weapon station. "We are being targeted, Captain. Hold fire," Jake ordered. "We are not here to fight. Amy, get us out of weapons range now." The Defender banked hard and its engines straining as it tried to break away from the combat zone. But the Elf cruiser pursued and more weapons fire streaking through space toward them. One blast struck their aft shields and the ship bucked violently. "Shields down to 60%, Amy reported. "Captain, we cannot take many more hits like that." Lynn stood and her face pale. "I have to do something," she said. "Jake, you need to let me take a shuttle and approach them alone. If they see me in person and without human guards, and they might listen." "Absolutely not," Jake said. "That cruiser is in combat mode and they will shoot first and ask questions never. You would not make it halfway there." "Then what do we do?" Lynn asked desperately. "We cannot fight them and we cannot run forever, and my mission to bring peace will fail before it even begins." Spark suddenly chirped loudly from Lynn's shoulder and launched himself into the air. The gold dragon flew to Jake and landed on his chest and claws gripping his uniform. The dragon's golden eyes stared into Jake's, and suddenly he felt a rush of images and emotions flood his mind. He saw through Spark's eyes and saw the elf cruiser and saw the fear and anger of its captain. He felt the captain's grief over lost crew members and his burning desire for revenge. But he also felt something else, and a tiny spark of doubt and a question of whether more killing would actually bring anyone back. "I understand, Jake," whispered to Spark. The dragon chirped again and flew. "Back to Lynn. What just happened?" Lynn asked. "What did Spark show you?" Jake turned to Amy. "Open a channel to that elf cruiser and make it visual. Lynn, you and I are going to appear on their screen together and we are going to make them understand." The view screen flickered and the face of an elf captain appeared. He was older than Lynn, with silver in his dark hair and scars across his face that spoke of many battles. His expression was cold fury. "I am Captain Jake Morgan of the human frigate Defender," Jake said before the elf could speak. "The woman with me is Lynn, and I rescued her from a damaged ship in an asteroid field 3 days ago. She was dying and her dragons were dying, and I chose to help her even though my people and yours are at war. I chose to show mercy because I am tired of death, and I think maybe you are too." The elf captain's eyes widened slightly as he looked at Lynn. "Is this true?" he asked in English. "It is true," Lynn confirmed. "Captain Morgan saved my life when he had every reason to let me die. He lost family to our people just as you have lost crew to humans, and yet he chose compassion over revenge. I am returning home to tell our leaders that peace is possible, and that there are humans willing to bridge the gap between our peoples. Please do not make his sacrifice meaningless by killing us now." The elf captain was silent for a long moment. "I am Captain Theron of the Dawn's Light," he finally said. "I have fought humans for 3 years, and I have buried friends and crew, and I have sworn to make your people pay for what they took from me." His voice cracked slightly. "But I am tired, and my crew is tired, and maybe we have all spilled enough blood." Theron looked at Jake directly. "You rescued one of our own when you could have left her to die, and that is not the action of a monster. That is the action of someone who remembers what it means to be honorable even in war." He took a breath. "I will let you pass, Captain Morgan, and I will not fire on you again. But know this, and if you betray the trust you have built here today, and I will hunt you across the stars." "We will not betray it," Jake promised. "We are trying to end this war, not continue it." Theron nodded slowly, then his image disappeared from the screen. The elf cruiser broke off its pursuit and turned back toward the human destroyers, but its weapons remained cold. The battle simply stopped as both sides seemed to realize that something significant had just happened. Captain Amy said quietly, "The human destroyers are hailing us and they want to know what just happened." "Tell them we brokered a temporary ceasefire," Jake said. "Tell them that sometimes talking works better than shooting." The rest of the journey to the elf border was peaceful. 5 days after leaving Station 7, the Defender arrived at the designated coordinates where elf ships waited to receive Lynn. She stood on the bridge one last time with Spark and River at her sides. "I do not know how to thank you, Jake," she said. "You gave me back my life and you gave both our peoples a chance at something better." "Just make it count," Jake replied. "Tell them what happened and make them understand that we do not have to be enemies." Lynn hugged him, and the embrace brief but genuine. Then she smiled. "Spark wants to give you something," she said, "a part of himself to keep you connected." The gold dragon climbed onto Jake's shoulder and touched his forehead with his snout. Jake felt warmth spread through his mind, and suddenly he knew he would always be able to sense Spark, no matter how far apart they were. The bond was real and permanent and deeper than words. Thank you, Spark, Jake whispered. As Lynn and her dragons transported to the waiting elf ships, Jake stood on the bridge and watched them go. He touched the pendant beneath his uniform and felt the bond in his mind and knew that something had changed forever. The war was not over, but now there was hope, and sometimes hope was all you needed to start building something better. Amy approached him. "So what now, Captain?" she asked. "Now we go home," Jake said. "We file our reports and we wait and we see if what we started here takes root. We showed that mercy is stronger than hate, and maybe that is enough." The Defender turned toward human space, and in the distance the elf ships did the same. But both sides carried with them the knowledge that change was possible, and that sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose peace over war. The medical bay of the Defender hummed with activity as Dr. Kate Wilson worked to stabilize Lynn. Jake stood outside the observation window and watched through the transparent barrier as the medical team moved around the elf woman. Spark and River sat on a bench beside him and refused to be separated from their location where they could see their bonded master. Captain Chen said quietly as she approached, "Station 7 has acknowledged our message, and they are preparing medical facilities, but they have also informed Fleet Command about our passenger. Admiral Ross wants to speak with you immediately." "Of course he does," Jake replied without taking his eyes off the medical bay. "Put him through to my ready room and I will take the call there." The Admiral's face appeared on the screen moments later and his expression severe. "Captain Morgan," he began without preamble, "I have received a very unusual report stating that you have rescued an elf pilot and are transporting her to one of our stations. Please tell me this report is somehow mistaken." Jake sat straighter in his chair. "The report is accurate, sir. We responded to a distress call and found an injured pilot. I made the decision to render aid as required by regulations regarding distress calls." Admiral Ross leaned forward and his eyes hard. "Those regulations assume we are dealing with civilian vessels or neutral parties, Captain. This is a military vessel from a hostile power, and for all you know, this could be an intelligence operative or a spy. Did you consider that possibility?" "I considered many possibilities," Sir Jake replied, keeping his voice level. "I also considered that leaving an injured person to die in space goes against everything we claim to stand for. If we abandon our principles because of war, then what exactly are we fighting to protect?" The Admiral was silent for a long moment. "Your record is exemplary, Captain Morgan, and you have served with distinction for 5 years. But this decision will have consequences, and Command is very unhappy about the situation. When you arrive at Station 7, you will transfer the elf into their custody and remain there pending a full inquiry into your actions." "Understood," Sir Jake said, though his jaw tightened. "Will that be all?" "One more thing," Captain Admiral Ross said, and his expression softening slightly. "I heard about what happened to your family, and I know you have more reason than most to hate the elves. That makes your decision even more puzzling, but perhaps also more significant. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I respect the courage it took to make that choice, even if I do not fully agree with it." "Thank you," Sir Jake replied, and the Admiral's image disappeared from the screen. When Jake returned to the observation window, Dr. Wilson emerged from the medical bay and pulled off her surgical gloves. "The elf will live," she announced. "We have stabilized her condition and repaired the most serious damage, but she will need several weeks of recovery time. Her physiology is different from humans, but not so different that our medical techniques do not work. She is remarkably resilient." "Can she speak?" Jake asked. "Not yet," Dr. Wilson replied. "I have her sedated to allow her body to heal without stress. Perhaps in a day or two she will be strong enough for conversation." She paused and looked at Spark and River. "Those dragons have not moved since you brought them aboard. They just sit there watching her through the window. I have never seen anything like the bond between dragon and rider, but seeing it in person is quite remarkable." Jake looked down at the two small creatures. They had been quiet since the medical team took Lynn away, and their scales dull with worry. He knew that if she had died, they would have died too, and their life force somehow tied to hers in ways that science could not fully explain. 4 hours later, the Defender docked at Station 7. Jake watched from the bridge as medical personnel transferred Lynn to the station's advanced medical wing. Spark and River tried to follow but were blocked by security, who viewed them as potential threats. The dragons shrieked in distress, and their cries echoing through the docking bay. "Let them go," Jake ordered over the comm. "They need to be with her or they will die. It is not a threat, it is biology." After some argument, the security team relented and the dragons rushed after their master. Jake felt something unclench in his chest as he watched them disappear into the station. At least that much had gone right. Commander Paul Grant met Jake as he disembarked. The commander was a stern man with 30 years of service and a reputation for following regulations to the letter. "Captain Morgan," he said with a stiff salute, "I am to escort you to the inquiry room where Admiral Ross and several other officers are waiting. Your crew will remain aboard the Defender until this matter is resolved." Jake returned the salute and followed Grant through the station's corridors. They passed civilians and military personnel who stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Word had spread quickly about what he had done. The inquiry room was a stark chamber with a long table where 5 officers sat, including Admiral Ross. Jake stood at attention while they reviewed his report. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Admiral Ross finally spoke. "Captain Morgan, you have put us in a very difficult position. The elf you rescued has regained consciousness and confirmed your account of events. She claims she was attacked by unknown pirates and that you saved her life when you had no obligation to do so. She has also requested to speak with you directly, which is highly irregular, but we have agreed to allow it under supervision." Jake felt surprise flicker through him. "She wants to speak with me?" he asked. "Why?" Admiral Ross shrugged. "She says she owes you a debt that must be acknowledged. Elf culture places great importance on such matters, apparently. You will meet with her in 1 hour in the medical wing. Until then, you are confined to quarters. This inquiry is not over, Captain, and there will be consequences for your actions, but we need more information before determining what those consequences will be." An hour later, Jake found himself in a private recovery room where Lynn lay in a medical bed. Spark and River were curled on either side of her, and their scales bright and healthy again. She looked much better than when he had last seen her, and the color returned to her skin and her injuries bandaged properly. "Captain Morgan," she said as he entered, and her voice stronger now. "I am told I owe you my life and the lives of my companions. This is a debt I can never fully repay." Jake pulled up a chair and sat down. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "I did what anyone should do in that situation." Lynn smiled sadly. "We both know that is not true. A human captain rescuing an elf in the middle of a war that has cost both sides so much, and this is extraordinary. Why did you do it, Captain, and truly?" Jake was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I lost my brother in this war," he said finally. "My parents too, and the elves took them from me, and I've hated your people for 5 years because of it. When I found you in that ship, every instinct told me to leave you there and to let you face the consequences of your people's actions." "Then why did you not?" Lynn asked, gently. "Because of them," Jake gestured to Spark and River. "When I saw those dragons looking at me and pleading for help, I realized something. Hate had not brought my family back, and it had not made anything better. It had only made me empty inside, and I was tired of being empty. So I chose to help instead, and maybe that makes me a fool, or maybe it makes me human. I do not know anymore." Lynn reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and surprisingly strong. "You are no fool, Captain Morgan," she said. "You are perhaps the bravest person I have ever met, and it takes no courage to hate, and it takes tremendous courage to show mercy, especially to those we believe are our enemies."